Hello and welcome to the LawCast, Series 2, Episode 2. This is where we talk about news and events that happen in the legal field, and we provide tips and tricks for helping you run your law firm. As always, I'm Alex Simons from the Law Factory, and I'm really pleased I'm joined by two people today, two people that go way back and know each other very, very well, and that is Pambos Patsalides from Haslers and Jeremy Downham, who's actually a senior partner of the Law Factory. And today we're going to be talking about all sorts of things, focusing on things like mergers and acquisitions, which I know is quite a hot topic at the moment. And then we're going to start looking at sort of good practice management and things that we're also seeing in SRA AR reports in 2024. So Pambos, please go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and where you're from, please.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Alex. I'm a partner at Haslers. We're a 10-partner practice, and I've been here since 2016. One of my niches is law firms. I've been dealing with them since I was a trainee. So I started my career back in '89, and one of my first memories of being a trainee accountant was attending a law firm's premises and being faced with manual records, client accounting records, ledger cards, and I did what most juniors used to be allocated as their first piece of work on an assignment like that, which was to go through and tick out 100% of the balances on ledger cards through to the list of balances. So relevant to this podcast is really my law firm experience, and then that progressed through to just naturally going through the ranks in an accountancy practice, and then developing a little bit of a niche in law firms. So at one point I was dealing with maybe over 20 law firms of varying sizes, and that was at my training practice, and then that got taken over by Smith & Williamson, who were a bigger practice. So then I got some experience dealing with much larger law firms whilst working out their Moorgate offices in the city. And even international law firms. So not only on the accounting statutory audit side, but also assisting international law firms that thought it was a good idea at the time to take advantage of LLP status. So they opened offices in the UK and registered as a UK LLP to give themselves the veil of incorporation. I dealt with a large German law firm that did exactly that, and then ended up even traveling to Germany and auditing their records in Germany, which was an experience. So at Haslers, I still have a number of law firm clients, mostly sort of regional around. So Loughton is the office where the office is based. So there's a few law firms that have been looked after by Haslers, and I've taken them over. But also law firms in central London. Nothing too big. Turnovers now up to about 5 or 6 million. So pretty niche practices with a variety of different services. And then over the years, I'm still obviously involved in all the compliance work we do for law firms, which is accounts preparation, the reporting to the Law Society, and then I oversee obviously the tax work that we do for the partners. So that's LLP tax returns and partners tax returns. Make sure all that's being done on time, and trying to save them as much tax as possible in the most efficient way. And then as part of that work, I've also been involved in transactions where law firms have been taken over. Mostly that's what I've been involved with, where because of the smaller size of law firm that I deal with, where there's been issues regarding succession, and so the partners are looking to merge in with larger practices so they can basically retire. That's the way it's been. I've not really been involved recently in any mergers where there's that isn't the motivation. That tends to be the motivation now. Yeah.
Oh, great.
So that's a summary of my law firm experience. But I mean, I am an auditor. That's one of my main roles at Haslers. So So basically, SAR examination work is a little bit like an audit, even though people call it an audit, it's not an audit, but that's my bread and butter work. But obviously, as I say, law firms is an area that has always been a niche of mine, and I keep up to date with what's going on. And being a partner in a firm myself, I feel that I can now offer pretty good advice to law firms, to partners at law firms running their practices. An area that I figured out very early on in my career is something that was overlooked in the past. But I think, as a partner in a firm myself, I can now reflect on the issues that we have, and I can offer advice to law firms about how they run their practice.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you very much for that detailed response, Pambos. That's really, really great. You've certainly seen a lot. It doesn't sound like there's a lot it doesn't sound like there's much you haven't been a part of, to be honest, with law and the accounts involved with that. So that's really great. Thank you. And
Yeah.
of course, I'm also joined by Jeremy Downham, senior partner of Law Factory. So, Jeremy, do you want to sort of give us sort of a history of where you're from and all that kind of thing?
Absolutely. Well, I started out on my own in 1990 after having done 3 years of work with another legal cashier in various smaller practices around central London, West London. Went through the 90s working mainly for large legal aid practices, which is where I really cut my teeth. I was involved in the first part of franchising, which was interesting to say the least. I mean, legal aid prior to that was something that anybody could do, whereas once you've gone past the mid-90s, you had to have a franchise certificate for it. Obviously, that's again changed dramatically over the following 15, 20 years as legal aid firms have got less and less and less. Thankfully, our firm has kept pace with that, and we've still got quite a few big legal aid firms that we work for, which is always encouraging. Since about 2003, Law Factory started in its present state, I would say. We built it up over the years, and you would know because you've been with me by 5 years since then, Alex. And we've always emphasised relationships with our clients. That's the one thing I've always said it put first and foremost in with regard to our company mantra. I try to encourage the staff to do the same thing, and I think that's worked quite well. Bookkeeping is only part of our role. I think if you look at compliance, that's also probably just as important. To touch on what Pambos said, it is something which I feel was overlooked as well regarding the accountancy side of things. Lawyers, much that I love them dearly, they're not natural accountants and bookkeepers. So they need people like us to help them move through the minefield, which is accounts effectively in bookkeeping. I think that once you've gone on from there, we got involved, we grew the practice to about 20, 30 practices. It's now standing at about 50, 55. We've got about 12 to 13 people working for us. We work for a host of law firms, running from small sole practitioners right the way through to some larger high street practices, a lot of niche practices, like I said beforehand, a lot of legal aid firms as well. And we're also doing charity work, which I'm really encouraged by. And we're also picking up a lot of international work as well, firms that are locating their practices in London because they need a branch office in London. And then also we've got a few niche practices which are high value, low volume, which is the kind of work that we really look forward to, because that's is where I think we major on, because that's part of our strength, which is looking at businesses which can't conform to just normal data processing. They really do need to have somebody like ourselves to hold their hand and get involved, roll their sleeves up and properly get involved in the business itself. I mean, going forward, I think that our natural home is as a consultancy, but will remain to be seen. But yeah, that's basically where I sit at the moment.
Great stuff. Well, thanks for that, Jeremy. So that's really good for listeners to know and sort of understand exactly how it all fits in and how we work, and also our relationship with Haslers. I know we've got some mutual clients as well, working together. So yeah, really great. So what I just wanted to do now is sort of have a look at sort of one of our main topics, which was something that Pambos mentioned earlier, which is mergers. Now we are seeing I personally have seen a lot more firms merge or get bought by larger firms and so on, more so than I have before. And I just sort of wanted to pick your brain, certainly, Pambos, about are you seeing that yourself, and sort of are you seeing the reasons for that at all?
Yeah. I mean, so it's not just been recently, probably last 3 or 4 years, maybe even going further back. But so we've seen exactly what I said, where firms haven't really thought about succession, and getting to a point where the partners are of an age where they're thinking, I need to wind my work life down, but there's no one coming through behind to take the reins from me. And there may be 4 or 5 partner firms I'm talking about now. And they can't seem to motivate the level below them to take over the reins. And that may be because of different attitudes in lifestyle. And to tell you the truth, when you see the profits that some of these firms are making, you do wonder why they're taking the risks that they are. Perhaps 20 years ago, some of these practices were making decent money, but the amount of profit that's been generated by some of these practices, and that may be because just price pressures on the sort of work that they're doing. Maybe a large amount of their work may be conveyancing, and there's been a lot of pressure on the pricing on. I mean, I haven't seen the price of conveyancing go up much in the 20 years compared to inflation, for instance. So these are having an impact on the profitability of practices, and it just doesn't make it an attractive proposition, maybe for some of the younger lawyers who are on a decent salary they may feel for the amount of work they're doing. It's not worth the extra 20% maybe that they're going to make if they were partners to take on the responsibility. And so from a desperation perspective, these firms are looking elsewhere to try and pass on the firm. And there's been a few consolidators about, and some of them we've probably heard in the news. Some of them have been real scams where firms have been taken over, and before you know it, there's an issue because the law society's found out that the client account's been used to actually purchase the practice. There's all sorts of things that have happened. And I've seen one particular client of mine has gone through 2 of these situations, and both have been they've had to back out of at their costs because it ended up that there were fraudsters actually buying these practices up, and they've been in the press. I don't want to start naming names. And eventually they just have to park their practice into another practice and just basically walk away. And at most they may get their capital out, but they won't get anything for the goodwill. And they just walk away having built up a practice, and it's such a shame. And I've seen that happen. And I've got a live situation at the moment that we're helping a particular business with, and it doesn't necessarily fall into the category that the partners are at the point where they're looking for retirement. There's a cross section of partners at different stages of their career, but they've mismanaged the business in the last quite a few years since I've been involved with them. And when I say mismanaged, it's been a profitable business, but they've just drawn too much money out, and they've never tax reserved. They've always gone out to get tax loans when they need the money. They get loans for everything. And just cash flow has been a problem, even though it's a profitable business. And they now find themselves with their backs up against the wall. One of the partners does want to retire. The others probably have another 10 years in them. And they're looking for an avenue to get out. Because if the partner that's leaving leaves, he doesn't get any goodwill. If you look at perhaps his current account, it's probably just about level capital, just to extinguish his current account, which is overdrawn, and he's managed to rack up loads of personal loans for tax liabilities. So even if he walks out today, he still has tax to pay for past earnings, and the money's not there to pay it. So he kind of is kind of looking at the firm thinking, what can I get out of it in order to at least pay for these tax liabilities so I can walk away? And that in itself is a problem. So you look at what the options are for them, and the options are that they either pack up the business but walk into another firm, and the other firm will have to consider what they're getting, but they're not going to pay anything for it. So they'll bring them on, perhaps give them a deal where there's some kind of fixed salary and then something based on fees generated. And so they're considering these options. There is currently a listed consolidator out there, though, that is paying goodwill and taking on businesses, but they'll take them on a specific deal with a so there'll be cash up front, and then there'll be an earn out over a few years, but the partners will have to stay there and on a salary which I would consider to be, you know, a new partner salary. So do they bite the bullet and take that option, and then be under the control of someone else? So that it's a difficult situation to be in, because the firm is worth really what there's no recurring business as such like we have in the accountancy profession. It's down to individual partner contacts generating that work. And so no one wants to risk just buying that and then losing the partners that generate that business. They have to stay there for a bit longer to bring that business in. So some difficult decisions for some of these partners in these situations to have to make. You know, and it's very difficult if you've been running your own practice, making all the calls, to suddenly be under someone else's direction. You know, but those are the consequences of I believe, of not making the right decisions historically regarding the working capital of the business and how you manage that aspect and the expectations of partners and what they draw out compared to what they're earning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it sort of leads me on to looking at sort of good practice management, and not just with the drawing of, or you know, overdrawing your accounts and stuff like that, but more about just the general good practice management and looking after the business, but also an aspect of you know, compliance and accounts compliance with SRA, AR, and all that kind of stuff, and making your business look attractive and actually in a good position. Because, you know, I know, Jeremy, you've been dealing with certain businesses recently, where we've been looking at good practice management overall.
I think just to agree, I agree with what Pambos has just said. I think that succession is becoming more and more difficult. I think that the current generation, I'm sure it will change, these things go in cycles, but I think the current generation aren't really the type of people who want to take on a practice. When I started back in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a clear pathway. You know, you did your training contract, you qualified, you became a solicitor, you then became a salary partner, you then became a partner. Your life was basically set out in front of you. I think that kind of thing has now changed. I think there are a number of social issues which have contributed to that. I don't think it's a bad thing in some respects, but it does cause problems as far as our lawyers are concerned. And I think the one that you're alluding to that we're working on at the moment is a classic case in point, where a senior partner has just slowly but surely, all the partners have effectively just left him on his own. He's now of an age where he's beyond pensionable age, and the firm was just slowly but surely just sinking beneath the waves. So we decided we would have a look at how we could, at the very least, try and consolidate what he's got, and then make sure that he wraps it up. We could wrap it up and then not so much sell it on, but at least bring it down with a soft landing. I think that was the main kind of like criteria about what we were trying to do. So, I mean, to do that, you're looking at, the first and foremost, it's the account side of things. So you look at the accounts, you look at the basics like the residual balances, you make sure they're all cleared out of the way. You make sure that you've got an aged debt, which makes sense, so that aged debt is meaningful, that you're going to get paid on most of those items that are within it. You then also have a look at the trial balance, just make sure there are no figures that are going to cause any problems. It's just a general tidy up of the entire client regime, and also things like archiving. Don't have files on your system if they don't need to be there. Get rid of them effectively. So it's streamlining that, and once that's done, then you can start to look at you make sure that's maintained as you're going forward. So it's not exactly an exit strategy. Or what I think what we're trying to do, and what I've tried to rename it as, is it's an option strategy. So there are a number of ways that you can get rid of a practice. One of them is by merging. And I think we've seen a lot of these consolidator practices. I mean, if you go back 40 years, the top 30, 40 law firms, you could have more or less hardwired for about 4 or 5 years. They wouldn't really change. They might switch up 1 or 2. But I think in the last 10 years, there's practices that started off life as being really quite small and now entering into the top 20, top 15. And these are because they've just been buying up practices on an ongoing basis. They've got accountants who more or less run them. And these practices have seen a niche in the market. And I think again, there are certain people who might look upon it and saying this is not the way it should be done, but it's just the way the world works. If someone sees a niche in the market, then you're going to basically take advantage of it. So, I mean, the other aspect of what I think of the other side, or what we're trying to do with this practice, is once you've done the consolidation with regard to the accounts, you then move to see what is actually tangible, what has a value to it. And although Pambos talks about goodwill, I think goodwill doesn't really stack up so much these days as it did. It was always part and parcel of the trial balance going forward. When I first started working, it was a figure that was meaningful, and it actually did have value to it. I'm not sure that's actually the case now. So, I mean, what we're trying to do is add something which I suppose could be called goodwill, but making it tangible. So, you know, have you got a wills database? If you do that kind of thing, if you have got a wills database, is it up to date? Have you had it reviewed? Your contacts list, is your contacts list viable? Are you still using those people? How many of your clients come back for repeat business? Those are the kind of, and these things need to be logged and need to be analyzed, so that when you've got someone coming along who perhaps wants to buy into your practice, you've done most of the legwork yourself. So the first thing they're not going to do when they turn your accounts upside down is start saying, well, that's going to take us so many months to sort out, as will that. All those things have already been done. And it's the same thing with the wills database and any other contacts list that you have as well. I mean, I speak on, this is kind of like just regarding the practice that we've got. So those are the kind of like things that as far as best practice management is concerned, if you're looking at an option strategy and moving on from the practice you've got already, those are the main things I would be looking at to get it sorted.
So it's also, I think, building before you've got to that stage, perhaps thinking a bit earlier in your career as a partner, you know, earlier on. You know,
correct, yeah.
What is it? And then sort of trying to get it started earlier, so you're building better habits earlier, so that by the time you get to succession merger, you're already there, you know, nearly there.
It's sound. I mean, that's a very sound idea. I mean, and it would make eminent common sense. Unfortunately, you know, when you're at your earlier stage of your career, exit strategies are something within in the distance. All you care about is making the money, building it, moving it forward, and then doing it again.
I think it's important to make lawyers realize very early on, what you should be doing is during your career is making your own provisions for your retirement. If you're relying on selling your practice at some point to then see you through the rest of your life, that's a dangerous strategy, I think. So it's just the nature of law firms. It's down to the individual. So you need a strategy where you're making it inviting for people coming through the ranks to join the equity. And I know, you know, in the past, you know, a lot of firms had what's called a lockstep. So, you know, they would enter the equity, and the senior partners would get a share of the profits that have been generated by the younger partners. And as those partners went through the lockstep, their share increased. And so they were earning sufficient money in order to, essentially, they were selling their goodwill at that point. Do you see? So they don't have to then rely on selling the goodwill of the practice that they've been part of when they retire. They could just walk away knowing, I've earned everything I need to earn out of this practice. I can now walk away and it's in good hands, but I've earned out of it already. The people coming through have paid me already because they were on a lower profit share than me for a while. So if people haven't had the foresight to do that, or for some reason, because the opportunities weren't there, the people coming through weren't there, and they end up in this situation where they're just like, I want to retire now. Who's going to come and buy my practice? Well, unless you're willing to go to a consolidator who's going to give you something, but essentially they're not really giving you anything, because they're expecting you then to stay on as an employee for a few years, to bed those clients in, to then pass that knowledge on to someone else at a pretty low profit share. It won't even be a profit share, you'll be an employee. And I think those are the situations we're seeing now. And if you don't take that option, then the only option that's left is just to pass it on to someone and walk away, because people aren't willing to pay for it, because they're not willing to pay for it. They're not willing to pay for a practice if the people that generate that income are suddenly not there. They need you there to be able to secure that income coming in for a few years, to at least make it worth their while of taking you on and paying for your runoff insurance and so forth. That's what I've seen. So all the stuff that you're talking about, Jeremy, about getting your house in order, totally, that should be in place from day one. You should know exactly what's happening with your debtors, your client account. All that should be fine. You should be getting clean reports every year, and you should be on top of your day-to-day management of the business. That's just part and parcel of, you shouldn't have to, but a lot of firms do need to put that in order to make themselves even attractive to anyone. But yeah, I agree.
No, I mean, I think you're right, Pambos. I mean, like I said, it is, and I think Alex was alluding to it as well. It's actually thinking about that kind of thing earlier on in your career. And we've got a number of practices who do think about that. I mean, I'm not saying that all lawyers are like that. There are quite a few practices which will look at how they, will use us to kind of like produce these reports for them. And they have a very clear objective about how they want their practice to work. And those guys won't, and in many situations, those guys won't have any problems when it comes to actually divesting themselves of their responsibilities and of their business. It's the other ones who slowly but surely, if something's happened to the business which has not gone sideways, they're the ones who kind of like find it difficult, who keep on going. And that's well, I think there's probably about 2 or 3 that I've had in the past where they really should have stopped when they had the problem, but they, for some inexplicable reason, they just keep on going. And that's where you then have to look at how you can actually kind of like do something with what you've got left, and so that they can actually just, as you say, in some cases, not even walk away with anything, but at least kind of like make sure that the landing is fairly soft, so that there is provision to make sure they've got the runoff as far as their insurance is concerned. They have got their overdraft down to a manageable figure so they can pay it off. So it's just getting rid of some of those debts, because if the debts run to a point, they just feel they've got to keep going just to maintain the debts. That's the only problem.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. It's really interesting. I'm a very strong believer in if you know something's wrong or you're uncomfortable, get in there and get it sorted out, or at least find somebody to help you do that. And I think that's like top of the agenda. And every law firm has, even if law firm doesn't sort of use outsourced cashiers or whatever, they've all got accountants and auditors that are there waiting for them to pick up the phone and say, look, I'm struggling. What can I do? Can you help me? Can you advise me through it? And are you finding, Pambos, that firms are picking up the phone when they're in that situation over at Haslers?
Well, I've had situations where firms can't figure out exactly what's going on and why they're always struggling from a cash flow perspective. That tends to be the case. There's business coming in, they seem to be profitable, but they're always struggling from a cash flow perspective. So I've had assignments where I've gone in and I've had a look at this to try and explain it. And also, I think you said earlier on, I think Jeremy, you said that, with all the goodwill in the world, the lawyers are good at law, but they don't necessarily understand the accounting aspects, and sometimes they don't even understand basic things like a balance sheet and a profit and loss account. And I don't blame them. I mean, I don't necessarily know stuff that they would know from a law perspective. And so they've asked us to go in and just analyze the situation and come up with some solutions. And the solutions sometimes are very easy. They're pretty low-hanging fruit that you can give them. And it's simple things. It's, make sure you bill on time. Don't keep the month end open for too long, because what partners tend to do is they just keep saying, can you keep the month end open a bit longer? Because they're still working on an assignment, they haven't billed it yet and want to wait to bill it. And then you're delaying the whole process. There's a working cycle, the cycle of cash in a law firm is pretty straightforward. You open a law office, you've got rent to pay, you've got expenses to pay, you've got staff to pay, you take on work, you do the work. It could be 3-4 months before you get the first bit of cash in to pay for all those expenses. So you have to bear that in mind, so that the smarter you can be in accelerating that, the easier it is for the firm. So have very stringent controls regarding billing. Have billing targets at the beginning of the year, and make sure that your fee earners are billing and carrying out the work and sending out the bills. Don't just bill and put it in a drawer just to satisfy the accounts team. You've got to send out the bill. And and other basic things. Don't do work unless you've got an agreed fee, so you're not chasing for fees afterwards. So these are some basic things in terms of that side, the management of that side. Then you need to also take account of, okay, what are our projections say about what profit we're going to make? Okay, so we know that historically we've always reached these levels. So what does that mean about profit? What does that mean about profit allocation? And then what does that mean about our drawings? How much can we draw out to live on? So if we've got 100 grand profit per partner, okay, let's then conservatively say 50% of that is tax. Just say that, okay? Which leaves us £50,000 as allocated drawings, okay? Right, do I need 5 grand a month? How much do I need to live on? And and does that 50 grand a month, 50 grand a year, does that equate to 5 grand a month? Or if it doesn't, what does that mean? And you've got to adjust your lifestyle accordingly, but don't overdraw. And then if you get to a situation where there seems to be loads of cash in the bank, and your in-house accountant is telling you actually cash is good, we haven't got any issues, then perhaps draw down on your current account, but don't do it the other way around. Don't think, actually, I'd like to earn 200 grand a year. I'm going to start drawing 10 grand a month. And then when I get to the end of the year, I'll see what the situation is. That's wrong. You shouldn't do it that way, should you? Because you'll get to the end of the year, you realize you haven't got the cash, and you still got your tax to pay. And you think, right, now I'm going to go out and get work to satisfy last year's drawings. And that's what some firms have been doing. And there's no control over that. And once you lose control, it's very difficult to then change your lifestyle. So in answer to your question, yeah, I've gone in and I've told partners straight up, your drawings are too high. Your drawings are too high and you're not tax reserving. So that's why you're in trouble, because you have these key moments every year. It's your tax payments at the end of January, it's tax payments in July, it's your VAT quarter, where you just don't have the cash because you've drawn it all out. I don't know what you're doing with it. You're drawing it out. You're just putting it in a bank account. It's sitting in your bank at home, because you're better off not doing that and leaving it in the business as working capital to help the cycle. So work out how much you really need to live on. And then when you've got extra cash, then you can decide amongst yourselves, okay, we can distribute 100 grand according to our profit shares because we've got some extra cash sitting here. It's just, and that's the way to run your business. But they don't. They don't. And they won't listen. And I've gone in, I show some clients letters that I wrote to them years ago saying, well, look, this is what I told you to do. You didn't listen to me. And that's why you're in the same situation now. And then you're trying to find ways to reduce your cash outflow. Oh, well, let's reduce our payments on account. Let's do this. Things that, you can get under the radar. But all you're doing is kicking the can down the road. And you're never really facing the true facts, which is you've not run the business properly. You've not concentrated on the areas that bring in the cash, the billing. That's the start, to start with is the billing. And then even earlier than that, it's the business development side, is making sure that you've got good business coming through too, that you can bill well for, So there's loads of these things that are all interlinked. But it's just basically being able to run the firm in an efficient manner. And then you can build on that. otherwise you're always on the back foot, and that tends to be the problem. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I can see the levels of frustration coming through Pambos about the number of people you must have had this kind of conversation with over the years. I don't think it's not dissimilar to
sometimes
Alex and I about.
Yeah, and sometimes, Jeremy, I get really disappointed because I can see that it's a really profitable business.
Yeah.
Because the numbers demonstrate that it's profitable, but it's just, and that's the problem you get with a partnership, is that everyone needs to be on board with these sort of scenarios, and there's always going to be niggly little issues regarding, oh, he's got more profit share than me, and I'm, you know, why do I want to reduce why should I reduce my drawings? He should reduce it, you know, and these things. There's an undercurrent of these issues sometimes that then stops the reality of it. And the only way you can really sort it out is someone to come and say, this is what's happening. We got no choice. If we're going to continue running the practice, we have to take these steps because we didn't do it 10 years ago.
Yeah, really interesting. Just learning more about the kind of things that you're seeing and from partners, from your perspective, and seeing partners' behaviour. From a financial perspective, and it's and how it isn't all plain sailing.
Yeah, and look, let me stress, not every firm is like this, but there are these scenarios that I've seen, and it can be disappointing, you know, because I can see they're very good lawyers, they run a really good business, but they've just neglected the issue of succession. They've possibly neglected what the figures are showing them regarding the profitability and what they can draw out, and that can just compound the problem. And what sometimes, you know, you can't just wave a magic wand at it. You have to work at it, and there's a period of pain that you need to go through to come out the other end. Because as I say, there's solid businesses with good turnover, good clients, they do good work, but you have to have a certain amount of discipline when you're running a partnership. And those principles have to be instilled at a very early stage. And if they're not, then you go off on a wrong tangent, and it can be destructive to the business. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, look, yeah, really, really great, and it's really nice to have those insights into that. And you know, as Jeremy said earlier, these are things that we also see in certain businesses as we move forward, and we see a lot of trying to put sticking plasters over the real problem by reducing minimal amounts of expenditure in certain areas, and even potentially removing a certain amount of expenditure, which actually would aid them in the long run, because it will help them not have to do something themselves at what their hourly rate might be, and so on.
You've hit the nail on the head. That's what tends to happen. They try and find easy solutions that doesn't involve any pain for them.
Yes,
and exactly. I think that can be a mistake. Yeah.
Yes, indeed, and we see that we see that time again, and we do everything we can to explain it. Most of the time, you know, once it's all been explained and we have a decent set of reports, a decent understanding, they'll flip it around. But you do get some which is very head in the sand, and then it just pitches, which is really unfortunate. But moving on from sort of succession and I just wanted to have a brief chat about SRA accounts rules and stuff like that, and what we're sort of seeing in 2024. Now, the last set of major changes was when we lost the big handbook, and it went to
pamphlet.
More of a pamphlet size set of rules, which were a little bit less prescriptive, shall we say? And I'm just interested to hear from Haslers' point of view, and obviously we've got our opinions as well, but I'm interested in Haslers' point of view as to the kind of things that we're seeing raised primarily on an accountant's report in 2024, when they are raised, or even if they are raised.
I mean, that is the point. The point is that we've gone from a period, and as I said, you know, I've been in the profession since '89, and you know, it used to be considered questionable when you submitted a clean report. You know, that you were told that you should always have there's no way a law firm can go 12 months without breaching a rule somewhere. And it was, you always viewed a file with suspicion if there was a clean report at the end of it. And so we went through a phase where every report was qualified in some way. And we all knew that deep down inside, where there was no loss of client money in exclamation marks, the SRA did nothing. And I think in all the years that I submitted, I'm not going to say thousands, hundreds of SAR reports, I don't think we ever had the SRA come back and question one of the qualifications. And we were, the policy that we had back then was that we were very descriptive in if there was a breach, how the breach arose, what the consequences were, and we would state whether we thought there was any loss of client money. That in itself, that's actually quite grey, but anyway. So, and I thought that worked quite well to a certain extent, but I think what we weren't seeing was the volume of SAR reports that were probably landing on what I would imagine be a very small department in the SRA, and they had to review these reports and come to some conclusion. And perhaps what was happening was that amongst the volumes of SAR reports that they were getting, there was possibly the odd one that was actually quite serious. And it would have been very difficult to ensure that you found that one and did something about it. And I'm only speculating now, but I'd imagine that the thought process was, let's turn the table round on this. We don't want to know about trivial breaches, whatever that is. So they went down that route for a while. And if you remember, there was a time when that's what we thought. So we didn't report anything, but we had these from an accountancy practices or auditor's perspective, we had lengthy management letters on file where we found a breach, and we made sure the clients saw that and acted upon our recommendations. And in our minds, if there was a review of our files, because we were thinking about what our regulators would say, yeah, okay, we didn't report these breaches because we didn't think they were serious enough. We were told that, we didn't have to report it anymore, but we made sure that that was covered in that we spoke to the client about it. Again, the caveat here is that where we didn't think there was a major problem, it was just, things that you saw, and there were standard things, the reconciliation wasn't signed. Perhaps they didn't scrutinize maybe some differences on the reconciliation. There was issues in some of the timing, so money wasn't being transferred from client to office account within the 14 days. Little things like that you knew were procedural things that were wrong. We've now gone even more extreme, where they don't have to submit the report if it's not qualified. They only have to submit the report if it's qualified. And in my mind, that's actually worked against the SRA, because I am sure there is a number of law firms out there that haven't even managed to get their act together to get their reporting accountant to prepare the report, because I've been in that situation. And so we haven't been able to submit the report. Now, we should be at that point reporting to the SRA. We've not been able to, but I think it's just that there's probably differences of opinion about how that was dealt with. And I think in an effort to probably reduce the amount of time that the SRA needed to review the reports and to make it more focused on the ones that were important, they've perhaps swept a few things unintentionally under the carpet. And I'm wondering whether there are issues out there that haven't been uncovered yet, because perhaps the reports haven't been prepared for the last 3 years for a firm, but the SRA probably think that, it must be okay because they haven't submitted a report that isn't qualified.
Very true. It is very, very true.
And that's the position. Yeah. And until, and I don't know what their rota is in terms of, because, they do have the opportunity to go and visit practices and ask to see those reports, because you have to be able to produce the report if you're asked for it. So is that going to come? Is there a pressure cooker that's ready to blow at some point? I don't know.
I'm not really quite. I completely agree with you. I mean, there are so many things you just said that resonate with what we've been experiencing as well. I've never understood why you can't at least log a report, even if it's unqualified, to at least acknowledge the fact you've been able to produce your solicitor's accounts report within the 6-month period. It'd be nothing more than that. If it's logged, you don't have to look at it. It's unqualified, but at least it's been done. And as you quite rightly say, you now go into this grey area. And I agree with you. I think there are a number of practices out there which haven't got their act together, haven't actually produced these reports. The thing is now, though, that the oddity is now that even though you might have a clean report, if it's taken you more than 6 months to produce that clean report, it's a qualifiable breach because you've taken more than 6 months to produce it, which is somewhat counterproductive is not the right word, but it's a bit mad because you say what you're kind of saying is what? So my accounts are fine, and there's nothing wrong with them. They're the worst I've got is trivial breaches, but because I'm 7 months after the deadline, I'm a month or 2 months after the deadline, I'm qualified on that premise. So it is a bit odd. I have to be quite honest. I mean, I've never understood the law, the SRA, why they did such a completely drastic change in how they wanted to kind of like they wanted to regulate accounts within solicitors in the law world, so to speak, because you've got this situation where it was far too prescriptive, but now it's going so far the other way that most lawyers aren't really sure about what they're supposed to be doing or what they're supposed to be complying with. And you have this situation where I mean what we've always done is more or less take what the rules used to be and just basically implement and apply them to how we go forward with our law firms at the moment. I mean, Alex who does quite a lot of this stuff can elaborate on that, but we found that it's just been difficult to actually try to understand a thread that runs through this new way of regulating the accounts. That's what I would basically
Well,
say.
I mean, I recall, Jeremy, that we were very hot on making sure that SAR reports had been done by the deadline, and we had like these checklists that we used to follow, and and obviously there were already the March or April year ends, so come September, October, there was always a flurry of activity to try and get these reports finalized and everything. It's disappeared. That
I agree.
That way of thinking has gone, and I wonder whether it's just human nature that because you don't have to submit something physically now, that it's sort of suddenly pressure's off, but it isn't. It shouldn't be off. You still need to have that report in place. Yeah,
I agree.
So
it has changed. It has changed over the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, you're absolutely right. I do remember that. Now you mentioned it. It's that last 4 weeks to get things done, and that's always used to focus partners' minds. Was that last 4 weeks
exactly
getting it done? What do they mean by this? What do we have to kind of like give back to our accountants? And then you have to go through all of this stuff. And the number of times I've hit the deadline on the 30th at about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I wouldn't like to put a number on it, but but at least it got done and it went through, and then
we knew where we stood. We knew where we stood, and it focused.
And the negotiations you had with your accountant about what they deemed, and you had to, by doing that, you had to then think of a particular argument. You had to come up with a reason why this had happened. Whereas now, like you say, there seems to be a laissez-faire attitude towards it. That's what I feel is.
And I wonder whether that will come back and bite us. Where there's a lot, as I say, there's a lot of hidden issues that we don't know. We're not aware of. So that's definitely, I think, an issue. In terms of the fact that you can basically write your own rules. You write your own procedures. Again, as with my accountants and auditors hat on, I quite liked the detailed rules. I know there were sometimes people would say that's impractical, we can't do that, and but I think it worked. It worked. Yes, there's always people whinging, but it worked. And you also had a good argument because you're dealing with lawyers and you didn't want to argue with them, but you said, look, you know, you can't use the client's bank account as a bank account, and you know it says it here, and this, you know, and we've lost a bit of that the support that we had from the detailed rules. I think, yeah, that's a problem for me.
I completely agree. I mean, I counter it by saying I can understand that the world has moved on and regulation of solicitors' accounts have to kind of like do likewise. But I think that there was a lot to say about the old rules. They were very prescriptive. They meant what they said. As you said, there was less room for negotiation and for argument because it was fairly clear. It was written down what had to be done. Now, I think there's this. It's quite nebulous. I don't think that there's you can have two arguments on the same point. And Alex and I have had this. You can have two arguments on the same point, and both of you are right. And how are you supposed to, how are you supposed to articulate that when you're actually trying to get your solicitor's account rules in place? That's the problem. I mean, the interest one that the interest discussion we had last week.
Yeah,
that's and you know that's the one they're all talking about. They're saying that this is the next thing. It's interest. Now that COVID's gone, now the interest rates are going up, you must pay a fair amount of interest. And you and I had a you know, shall we say a heated discussion about
robust conversation, wasn't it?
Robust conversation.
But I think the key that was with the interest thing and certain policies that are coming in, it's do you have a policy or not?
Correct.
And if you got a policy, that's one green tick. Do you follow the policy? Do you follow your own policy? Okay, that's the second green tick. And then that's what. But if you've got no policy, or you've got a policy that you just don't follow, that's just scribbled out somewhere and left in the corner, well, then you can see why they might get a bit upset with you. So yeah, I agree. It's one of those ones, wasn't it? When they first changed them, it was the whole thing, and I heard it so many times. If you were compliant before, you're going to be compliant now. So just kind of relax. Exactly. But I think the issue has come. I think that something that's been highlighted here is the fact that generally across practice, perhaps the focus on it has been lost. And there was always that time before the rules changed where you had that 6-month period, certainly at the end of the 6-month period, that focused the mind and brought everybody back and said, right, come on, we got to abide by these rules. Have we abided by the rules? Yes or no? Where we've fallen down, okay, what do we do wrong and how are we going to fix it? But also having those conversations and actually having partners and management of a law firm actually take an interest in what's gone on throughout the year, and again, it brings us back to good practice management, doesn't it? And you need as a senior partner, you need to spend the time and actually take an interest in the nuts and bolts as to what's going on. I mean, and you only have one COFA in a firm, so really it's the COFA's job to do that primarily. But if you have a COFA that isn't doing that, and none of the other partners are interested in doing that, that's where we start losing all that interest, and that's where late reports come from, isn't it? Someone's been asked by Haslers, for example, you guys send off way in advance of deadline, right? Here's a load of queries. Cashier comes back, but there's certain things that only the COFA or the partnership can answer. And if their foot's off the gas, or they genuinely don't know, but are maybe, I don't know, too busy to help, then it just gets put to the back burner, and all of a sudden we've gone over the deadline, and straight away that's a qualification. But the problem is you can't then submit you can't submit the report because you still haven't had the original questions that you answered, that you asked. So you can't just send off the report and go, oh, it's qualified because it was late. It could have potentially have a load more qualifications on it, but you don't know because the person hasn't spent the time dealing with it. But as far as the SRA is concerned, your accounts are tickety-boo, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the problem you've got. If you remove the deadline, you remove the jeopardy. And with the greatest of respect, no one wants to stress. It's not a particularly nice process to go through. But with the greatest of respect, and I think going back to what Pambos said earlier, I said it's if you basically remove this deadline, then people just take their foot off the gas, and I think it will come back to bite them. I think at the very least, all reports should be submitted. They don't have to be looked at if they're not qualified, but they should be submitted by a deadline. It's not difficult. I mean, you could just do it on the email. You could have a. There must be some way of doing a submission. Why can you not just do that for all reports?
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's, I don't know why that hasn't happened. It's very odd that they didn't
some sort of notification.
instigate some kind of, just a database where you go in and you just, I've prepared the report, it's done, and if you want to see it, it's here, because I think
exactly.
the physical, the fact that you're going in and doing that is enough motivation to get it done.
Yeah.
Because no one will tick that box unless they've got a report. Let's face it, they're lawyers. So yeah, that would have been an easy fix, I reckon. And maybe they'll introduce that.
Can you imagine if the VAT turned around and said, "Don't worry about the submission, just send a quarterly one in when you can." It's it's just, but it's.
We'll assume you've got no VAT to pay this quarter.
Well, exactly. Even if you got a zero VAT return, as you know, if I'm doing a zero VAT return, it's got to be in by the 7th. Otherwise, I'm going to get a yellow notice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not beyond the wit of these guys to actually do the same thing. There should be some. It should be submitted. If it's not submitted,
it's like saying, for instance, you've got to submit your tax return by the end of January. But if you've got no tax to pay, don't worry about it. Don't submit it.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, HMRC make the point. They said we don't care about they wouldn't say they don't care about the money.
But if we subsequently, if we subsequently turn up at your doorstep and we want to see your calculation, then there'll be some problems. And
record low tax return.
Get the documentation on there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. We've unfortunately, however, come to the end of time on this episode of LawCast. So very grateful for you both joining me for this episode. It's been a lot of fun and very interesting diving into these topics. So perhaps Pambos, you could just let our listeners and viewers know sort of how they can get in touch with Haslers, what the best way of doing that is, and
well, if you go onto our new website, we've got a new website with some a new look. There you can follow links there and submit any questions or inquiries about our services. There's loads of information there about what we do, and our clients and our client base. So yeah, that's the.
You have been listening to the LawCast, brought to you by the Law Factory. Why not subscribe to our Spotify and YouTube channel and head to thelawfactory.net for more information.